Welcome to the Leap Health Workplace Podcast. Here we explore innovative, proven health and wellbeing solutions to drive your performance and productivity. Leap Health empowers individuals and organisations to prioritise their health and wellbeing as a catalyst to performance and productivity. We do this by providing workplace health and wellbeing performance workshops and also the Leap 360 one-to-one leadership coaching to drive health, wellbeing and performance, powered by the Game Changer Index Energy for Impact profiling tool. And we offer bespoke corporate programs to ignite proactivity in ownership at all levels of health and wellbeing as a catalyst to performance and productivity. Whether you're sat at your desk right now or on the move, get ready to listen, get ready to invest your time and take action straight after. I'm Anna Reddy. Let's get ready to make small steps to leap health. Welcome to today's podcast episode. I have genuinely been excited about this conversation since our incredible and first co-host, Vaasvi Chaudhary, introduced me to the remarkable Shahana Alibhai. And I'm so grateful to Vaasvi for introducing us and connecting us today. So a little bit about Dr Shahana Alibhai. She is a TEDx speaker, family physician, and the medical director of British Columbia's largest youth health centre. I've got utmost respect for her dealing with youth going through teenage years. I have one at home and incredible work there, something I could not do. But without further ado, with me telling you a little bit about her, I'm going to actually use the words of somebody else right now, which will just let your ears prick up and make you realise the credibility and amazing impact that Dr. Shahana is going to have today. So this quote: "For most of my life, I had zero control over my emotions, so my actions were driven by what I felt in the moment. If I'd had the research-backed strategies Dr. Shahana outlines for you in this book, I could have avoided a massive number of mistakes." That quote comes from, yes, your friend, you might have heard of before, Mel Robbins. This is your friend, Mel Robbins. And I guarantee you, after this episode today, Dr. Shahana will be your friend. I've listened to her on podcasts, spoken to her, and straight away, she just oozes energy, personability, and you will feel like she's your friend at the end of today. So before diving into immense credibility of today's special guest, I want to take a moment again to recognise Vaasvi, who I've been working with through Leeds University. She's studying there at the business school, and we've been working on a consultancy project together. And I offered the students the opportunity to jump on the podcast, and straight away she recommended Dr. Shahana, and here we are today. But what makes today really special is that we're approaching it from different angles, which again we've never done before. So we're looking at that postpartum period. However, I'm going to be approaching it from a golden old age with experiences 3 times of going through that. And Vaasvi is looking at it through an angle and a lens of curiosity, not having gone through it yet. So hopefully from today, wherever you are on your journey, you will be able to see it through different lenses. And Dr. Shahana is going to share her expertise in all those different stages with some really, really practical outcomes as to what we can do to change things and improve things as well. So I'm going to let Vaasvi introduce herself as well now. And yes, quieten down.
Thank you.
Over to you, Vaasvi.
Thank you, Anna. It's such a privilege to introduce Dr. Shahana Alibhai as the medical director at Foundry Abbotsford, British Columbia's largest youth health centre. Much of her career focuses on helping those struggling with the mental health challenges. Dr. Shahana's expertise is highly sought after. She has collaborated with organizations like Scotiabank, Remax, Yale University, and UBC, and her work has been featured on major media platforms like CDV and Global. One of her most poignant quotes, "We do not suffer from the lack of joy, simply a lack of recognizing," was selected for an award-winning planner gifted to stars on the red carpet at the Oscars. Beyond her clinical work, Dr. Shahana has collaborated with New York Times bestselling author Adrian Gostick to publish her book, Feel Better, which became the #1 bestsellers in psychiatry and parenting on Amazon. Dr. Shahana, we are so thrilled to have you join us today. Let's dive in.
Thank you so much. What a warm introduction from both of you. I'm really excited for this conversation.
So with the first question then, let's dive in with this. Now you've had a big build up, so we wanna hear from you straight away. And what actually inspired you, and what was your passion for supporting women as they navigate through that postpartum period? Is there experiences that have led up to this, and what's really intrigued your curiosity and giving you that purpose to help people in this situation?
Yeah, there's some markers in our life that we will remember forever. And in 2019, when I stood on that TEDx stage, I called myself a hypocrite. That's a big thing to call yourself, but I was a hypocrite. And what I meant by that is that I was there to advocate and support and be with you and walk alongside the journey with you of mental, emotional, physical health as a physician. But when it came to me, like, could that ever affect me? The truth of the matter was, I thought I was, this is the blunt truth of mental health, is that you think you are too good for it. Like any euphemism of that, but really that's why we have the stigma that comes down to mental health. So I really felt that my upbringing, the privilege, the profession that I was in, the training actually bolstered me from any sort of mental illness. But all it did was make me more susceptible, right? That's the difference. Because sometimes the more untouchable you think you are, for better or for worse, that's where the fragility actually gets baked into it. And it wasn't until I was literally on my knees, realizing that I had spent the last 12 years not studying health, but studying disease and illness and trying to figure out, how did I get here? And that was the same question I posed to the psychiatrist, the reproductive psychiatrist, who knew there was such a specialty. When I had my young one, my first son, who was maybe 6 months, with me in the office, looking around this reproductive psychiatry office going, how did I get here? And I did. I was there. So the reconciliation of that in the TEDx talk, that's what really bore this message of, it happened to me. It happened to me in a very big, meaningful way. During the time I was going through it, there was actually a death in our community that was linked to postpartum mental health. The woman ended up taking her own life. So the series, sometimes there's a series of events. And it was suddenly the time where I realized that it wasn't, why am I staying silent anymore, too? And the more I started sharing my story, the more I was met with the two words that I think every parent, woman, anybody who's going through this journey wants to hear, which is, me too. I'm right there with you.
Really moving. I think that's so important, isn't it, to get that me too, that me too environment where more people feel like they can be open and honest. And although you were doing your job to the best of what you thought, sometimes it's not just that clinical approach, is it? Sometimes it's just that life experience that helps you to get into the shoes of other people, and just show a little bit of vulnerability. And this is something which we struggle to do, don't we? We struggle just to show those little bits of vulnerability, but a lot happens from just sharing those little snippets of who you are. So thank you very much for sharing that. How would you actually define the postpartum period then? So when does it start? When does it end? Give us a little bit of clarity on that, please.
Oh, of course. And I think it's really important now when we talk about, if we looked at the lens of mental health, the words postpartum roll off our tongue, which is really defined, the first 6 months after when the baby's 6 months old. However, we should be looking at it at the perinatal time period, which is from conception, really, up until at least 6 months to a year after the baby is born. So that and not that you don't have mental health challenges before or afterwards, but I think perinatal really encompasses the time while you're pregnant, right away after the baby's born, and that year afterwards as well. So it takes this big holistic viewpoint as well, because what that definition brings into the fold is that if you have a pre-existing history or family history of mental health issues, you are that much more likely to, just like I was, to suffer with a mental health challenge during that time period. And one of the biggest things that if you are noticing any of those symptoms in the pregnancy period, don't wait until the postpartum time period. Start to get help early on, right? That's the key message there.
I love that early intervention because we can just minimize the consequences so much by that early intervention. And I heard you say recently on another podcast as well that sometimes we just go for that fast food in a solution option rather than digging down to what could be those real preventable things that we can actually do. And sometimes investing a little bit more time in that can yield greater rewards later on. Tell us a bit more, and just explain to our listeners a little bit more around that fast food analogy that I've heard you use.
Yeah, so I sometimes I call it just fast food medicine, this idea that, I sometimes I felt like a vending machine, like, put in a coin, pull a lever, and here's a prescription. Put in a coin, pull a lever, and here's a prescription. And there's a role for that kind of medicine. Like, don't get me wrong as well. And then there's sometimes the fact that you need to be sitting down and going, why now? Why now have you decided to come forward? Tell me your story. And when you allow someone to tell you their story, I think sometimes as healthcare professionals, you're like, here it goes. It's going to be an hour, like sit back, but usually it's not that long, right? People just need a little bit of space to tell what they need to share. And I think you just uncover so much during that time period as well. When you talk about preventative strategies, and we were talking at the onset of this podcast, looking at the perinatal time period from the aspect of someone who hasn't had kids, obviously, and someone who has had kids. If I could kind of go back and give myself some advice, one of the biggest things I would try to do in the perinatal, even before conception, if that's possible, is to build out a strong support system, right? We hear about this aspect of connection. We know the importance and the detriments of loneliness as well. Postpartum time period can be a very isolating time period, right? You're kind of just, you're kind of in the world. And I remember thinking to myself one time, I'm like, everybody out there is operating, but for me, I don't know whether it's day or night or day. And you're just kind of in this feed, wake, sleep cycle constantly with your child as well. So I think feeling like you have a support system who can rally around you and be there for you while you are there for the baby, right? They're there for you, you're there for the baby, can be exquisitely important.
Yeah, and that connection is so important. We're seeing this more and more in studies coming out, the importance of connection in terms of our well-being. Have you got any questions around, any curious questions, Vaasvi, around preparing for that perinatal postpartum period?
So, as someone in my early 20s, I haven't yet experienced postpartum challenges. What would you say are the most important surprising aspects of this phase for young women entering in the corporate world to be aware of?
And I like how you prefaced that with the corporate world too. So, and I think there is a lot of similarity between medicine and the corporate world. And I think the similarity there is the feeling that if I study it, I can perfect it, right? That is the formula, right? And that is the formula for people who are trying, for a lot of women and a lot of people who are pursuing higher education, that productivity, I call, is the new caffeine. That becomes our new quote unquote addiction. That the more I can get done, the better I feel about myself and the more worth I feel in this space that we call the world as well. So what's really, let me break it, the secret too, is that I remember, when I was pregnant, every evening, this is how I was, I would, put tabs on all of the what to expect when you're expecting. I had a binder of how to change a diaper. I didn't know how to change a diaper. I didn't have any young cousins or anything like that. The best type of stroller, the best type of car seat I had done. And I poured myself into this as if it was a medical board exam, because that's all I knew in terms of how do you get good at something? You study it. So I had I always joke that my birth plan wasn't a birth plan. It was laminated. Like there is no changing that birth plan. It was laminated, ready to go. And part of my birth plan was I'm going to have which I don't like the word always, but a natural delivery, right? Do not give me any medications. I will not allow my baby to have a soother because I had done research saying, well, that's going to cause nipple confusion. I will only breastfeed as well. Within 72 hours of Ishan, my first being born, I had an emergency C-section. My milk didn't come in. The nurse stuffed a soother in his mouth. We were hospitalized for 2 weeks afterwards because of profound weight gain as well. Everything. And he was on formula because my milk didn't come in. everything that I had laminated and said, this is the way it's going to go, went completely out the window. And it was a beautiful and painful lesson for me to know to embrace curiosity, to embrace flexibility, and to realize that this baby has not studied the same textbook that you have studied as well. They have their own textbook as well. So I think that is one of the key things to know as well. You can prepare as much as you want to, but there's a certain aspect where you have to be able to let go a little bit too, because you just can't predict everything that's going to happen. And I think that's really hard when you've lived your life holding on to that rope toe that I know exactly where I'm going in life, because this baby has its own has its own story to develop.
I think what you said, like, you know, we we should like every mother has a laminated book wherein she knows what is going to happen, but it's not what actually happened. So
No,
from childhood, we just know how to, read the textbooks and go with the flow, and everything's going to be right. But in real life, it doesn't happen. So I
no.
really love the thing that you said right now.
And it's so hard. I think I remember in medical school, they'd given us a lecture, and here we were probably in our early 20s, and they showed, you know, fertility rates. Let's just put it that way. You know, how it was like everything's good, and then suddenly it drops off, and all the women are just like, oh my gosh. And here you are, you're trying to pursue higher education, you're trying to do, what you're supposed to do in this world, what you feel like you want to do in this world, and yet you have this parallel life of a biological clock. And that aspect, that duality of trying to pursue what brings you joy, what you want to serve in this world, and your biological clock, which really isn't waiting for anybody, that can be very anxiety producing as well, too. So I think now we're talking more about this, right? We're talking more about what decisions young women can make, especially if you don't have a partner and things like that. And if you do want to have kids, because I think the truth of the matter is that when women were finally finishing their education at 35, 36, 38, and then they might be struggling with infertility, that once again is we're talking about postpartum here, but we really also should be talking about the struggles, the counter of that, right? That I really want to have a child, and now I didn't think it was going to be this long, this hard, or suffering from recurrent miscarriages. All of that is silent as well. And we bring that into the workplace as well, too. So I think unearthing the silence behind all of this whole discussion is so worthy and so important.
Absolutely. It's going back to being that authentic self, isn't it? Just sharing a bit about yourself. And I love how you've just, really explained about how you can't just map everything out in life. We can try to have as much control as we can, but actually sometimes the most liberating, powerful thing is to lower our expectations and to be able to let go a little bit. And I know I've been through a long fertility journey, and once I let down the barriers for a lot of things, and again, you talk about women who are trying to progress in the corporate career, lots of stress, that can impact on your fertility as well. So I think that was just a really powerful point in terms of allowing the flexibility. Sometimes lowering your expectations a little bit, and just being kind to yourself, and going back to that plan. Sometimes a mother's intuition or an intuition knowing yourself is really powerful. So thank you, and that was great questions, Vaasvi. Thank you very much. So as people and listeners might have gathered, Dr. Shahana has loads and loads of amazing phrases which really resonate and explain what we're trying to talk about. And what I love when we chatted about before is that you describe something called the invisible chopping board. So tell our listeners a little bit more about what this invisible chopping board is, please.
Yeah, exactly. Like, look at just how you share. Like, we've gotten to know each other just a very little bit, and I wish we were closer so we could actually physically go for coffee and everything as well. But look at what you just shared with me. Like, I struggled with a fertility journey. What did I do there? Did I go like this, or did I go like this? Like, I leaned in right away because this is called a psychological principle called the beautiful mess effect. When you already know, like, and trust somebody, which I do for both of you as well, and you share something that's close to your heart, personal, vulnerable, people like you more. They like you more. This is why we like Mel Robbins. She's not just saying, my life is hunky-dory and everything's fine. She's very approachable. This is why we fall in love with Brene Brown the same way, right? So I think this idea of being able to share something personal, vulnerable, important about yourself. That's where the invisible chalkboard came in. This idea that we're all floating around with this chalkboard on our head. Next time you go to the airport, the mall, or you're standing in line to pick up your kids, in the schoolyard, glance around and just picture this for a second, that everybody has this floating invisible chalkboard, and on it is written what's really on their mind. Maybe their parent is suffering with dementia. Maybe they're in a conflict with their spouse this morning. Maybe they're having really big financial issues. Maybe they found a lump and they're waiting for a diagnostic ultrasound or something. Like all of this stuff. And if only we could be privy, not to all of it, but even to some of it. I think this culture of, I call fine the new letter F word. That's the new four-letter. I'm just fine. No, you're not. No, you're not. Because I think what that does, it allows us to, circling back to the conversation, is having meaningful connections with other people. Because we actually crave knowing some of that information. Because what does that do? It humanizes you. And it makes me see you as human, and you see me as human as well, too. So that's the concept. And I go into workplaces to go, can we start sharing what's on our invisible chalkboard? And if that's too scary, can you see your invisible chalkboard as just buckets? A financial bucket, a health bucket, a relationship bucket, and then you start going, how, as if your phone has a battery charge, how charged are you in that bucket for each one? I'm at a 1% for health, but I'm 99% for finances, or whatever the case might be. That's another way to approach this discussion too. So I think all of that, humans are so funny this way. We're so worried about asking the question. So we kind of dance around the issue. Like you talked about at the top, I work in youth care as a youth physician as well. We do the same thing with sexual health with our youth, right? I train residents all the time, and they kind of dance around the issue. I said, just ask. Youth will sniff you a mile away if you're being weird or awkward. Just ask. And I think we need to do the same thing in our workplace. Ask how people were, how actually are you? Because I think we're so worried about what the response is going to be. And we're so worried as the recipient of, can I handle it? It's not about you, it's about them.
Yeah. And I think you're quite right thinking about it's about them. So sometimes we have to get over ourselves, don't we, to help somebody else and be brave, have those conversations. Have you got any more examples you can share as to how we can avoid that I'm fine reply? Any couple of examples of conversation openers that people can take away straight away and try?
Oh, of course. I think if we go back to the workplace scenario, a wonderful one when you're starting a meeting, and even if you're not in a workplace, just thinking about this for yourself before you're going into a situation, for example, even work, where you go, give me 2 words of how I'm feeling right now. You can't use good, you can't use fine. 2 words. If you do this in a meeting setting, you will be shocked at what people actually say, what comes out of their mouth. I was doing this for a large company in the US recently, and everybody around the table was sad, pessimistic, hopeless, tired, fatigued. And suddenly, as people saw those replies come through in the chat, people became more and more open. And it was saddening to see, but at the same time, it was actually, that's real. That's actually how people are feeling, right? So the 2-word check-in, whether it's external in a meeting setting or whether it's internal, you do that before you go into a work or even in your home, that can be very beneficial to go, how do I feel right now? Like even before this call, I did the 2-word check-in right away for myself going, what am I feeling right now? Because like I talked to you guys right at the top, I've got a whole part of my brain going, am I going to get my little one to school on time? I'm going into a school right now that's recently suffered a death of one of their teachers. And that's going to be, I'm really anxious about that actually, how the students are going to be this morning. I'm carrying all of that into the conversation. And right, as I'm sharing this with you, you guys are nodding your head going, it's going to be okay. I've got you. That's the body language that I read. So that's a very practical tool of the 2-word check-in as well. The way that we get away from fine, though, internally, is being able to open up our repertoire to what our emotions are telling us. Because they did a study that showed, they asked North Americans, give me 3 emotions that you commonly feel. and it was mad, sad, and glad. That's all they could name. So it's really hard to expand on fine when your only repertoire for emotions is mad, sad, and glad. Like that's, so I think part of it is looking at the Harvard emotion wheel and going, am I feeling angry or am I feeling frustrated or resentful or disappointed? Expanding our vocabulary in terms of what we actually feel, because the language is important.
Absolutely. And for others to understand as well, then we've got to kind of get that language right. It would be amazing if we can share that wheel as well in the show notes.
Yes,
for people
of course.
That. That would be super. And I think we're going to go on to like parents and talking about walking on eggshells, how you often have that nervous feeling, don't you, as a parent, as to, have I remembered to pick a kid up from here, or how am I going to manage the childcare? But I think, exactly what you've done at the start of this podcast, what time am I going to be finished? Because I've got to take my little one to school. And just being honest about things rather than trying to block it out and think, I hope we're finished in time. And can ease a lot of that worry, but also you ease the worry of other people as well who are probably going through exactly the same thing. So I know you'd said before that there's always one carer who's kind of walking on eggshells a bit. And what strategies do you think can help couples to even that out a little bit?
Yeah, I like to joke that there's usually one fixed parent and one flex parent. And sometimes I don't even need to go expand further. People go, oh, I know what you mean, right? And just if you don't understand, it usually means, what if the child was sick? Which parent would cancel their day and stay home, i.e., the flex parent, and which one doesn't have that wiggle room? Who is the fixed parent, right? Not that one is bad or good, but it's important, once again, to have these conversations. And I think going back to what advice would I give to my younger self, once you are in a relationship, if that's the way that you choose to have kids, if it is in a partnership type of setting, to ask your partner, what's going to happen when the kid gets sick? Like what's going to happen? Like, because I think we don't have these conversations and we hold a lot of resentment to go, well, you could have canceled your day and now I have to do this. And then it's all the unspoken stuff as well. So in my relationship, yes, just by the way that it works, I, for the longest time, was the flex parent, right? I kind of still am too, because I tailor my schedule around kids pick up and drop off and all of the things that we just talked about right now too. However, what's really important for that is that, can you still carve out a period of time of, if work is meaningful to you or whatever meaningful activity that you do, that you still have space of doing something that serves you, that brings you joy. I'm not talking about when your baby is really little. Like those are really difficult times, right? They're sick and then they're teething and then you just start to get over something and then there's another sleep regression. I swear there's a sleep regression like every 6 weeks when they're little, right? There's always something happening. I'm talking when they're a little bit older as well. So I think the moral of this conversation is that when your child is little, if you can, to be able to give yourself a bit of grace, right? That is the heart. Try to have those micro moments of nourishing yourself, whatever that means for you, but know that they come in like confetti-like pieces, right? It's very easy for us to say, go for a walk and enjoy some sunshine. If you're in the trenches with your little one, that's often not practical, right? But try as much as you can to savor the moments versus the long stretches of minutes. That's my advice.
Super. So moving this on now then into in the workplace, when you go back postpartum in the workplace, because this can be a worrying period. I know with all my three, that month before I was worried about how's it all going to fit in, what's it going to be like. And once I got back, it was actually better than the thought of it before. And I know that I did get to a stage, it was around about the 9-month mark, when I was like, right, I am ready. I'm ready to start doing something, get my brain in gear. But I know lots of people have to go back a lot earlier than that. And if they haven't got to that stage when they're feeling, right, I'm ready to go back to work, that can be quite hard as well, can't it? Because they're still at a stage where they, feel like they're missing out a little bit on that precious time. So what can workplaces actually do to help women easily back to work?
There's a great quote by Ariana Huffington that says, when they take the baby out of you, they put guilt in. And I think that's a really lovely quote because there's this guilt of should I be working and contributing? Because let's be honest, financial stresses and issues are real, right? There are some families that they do have to go back to work, or you don't have a very long 18-month maternity leave, or you feel guilty about, oh, they're only going to be young once and I'm missing that precious time. So it's like this tug of war between who I used to be, who I am right now. So identity physically during that time, you have obviously changed, but you've also changed mentally and emotionally during that time. So I think the transition period going who you are going back to work is not often the same as who you were prior to. You're actually a very different person, right? And I think what can ease that transition, obviously, is that yes, you want a supportive workplace. You want a workplace that you can go to that understands the plethora of challenges that being a new parent can bring. We just talked off the top. Is your child sick? Like you just, oftentimes it's, okay, I'm going to put my child in daycare. My sister just went through this right now thinking, okay, perfect, my child's in daycare. Then what happens? 10 days into that, they're sick with every other virus, bacteria that could actually under the sun. And now then it infects the whole house, right? So I think it's workplace sick times. I think the biggest thing is trying to have a team of people who get it that this is a very unpredictable time, right? You are trying to find pieces of yourself again. But I like what you said. There often is a time, especially if you did enjoy your work perinatally before you got pregnant, that you will want to contribute. So perhaps the idea and the solution is having your boss, having your leadership team to have a conversation. What is manageable for me right now? My workload, what I had before, might be completely different. What can I do in my scope right now to feel like that I contribute to? Then there's actually the practical stuff. The practical stuff that am I breastfeeding, or do I need to be pumping every few hours? Do I have a space that I can actually do that? A lot of physicians sometimes they don't have maternity leave or a very short maternity leave. They're in the operating room with electronic pumps and they're operating as they're getting pumped. Like it's wild to me as well, but they're trying to be in a very masculine world and try to do this at the same time. So I think having these open conversations that no, I do want to be pumping every 2 or 4 hours. Can I have a quiet place to do that as well? Can I have the time to do that? And having a respectful workplace that understands the choices that you're making. Mentorship, if possible, having someone who's gone through the process or has gone through it recently enough that knows what it feels like. Because even my kids are 9, 7, and 5. I remember that time period very well, but still I feel a little bit detached. So having someone who's gone through it recently act as a bit of a mentor to you, and as a support, that is so incredibly valuable as well.
Thank you. Some really, really valuable nuggets there of advice. Thank you. And I guess as well, we've got to take into account the hormonal changes and the lack of sleep that's going on and all sorts of things that could be compromising our well-being and at work. But there are lots of misconceptions around mothers in the workplace, aren't there? When actually, women in the workplace bring so much value, and I've done a lot around the menopause and how we retain that valuable talent. But it is imperative that we nurture people as women as they come back to work to retain that talent, and we still want to develop as individuals. So workplaces really need to recognise the importance by implementing some of the actions that you've suggested, so that they can retain that valuable talent. Talking about valuable talent, Vaasvi, I'm going to hand over to you now. How can what questions have you got of curiosity that's going to answer some of the listeners that are thinking now, I want to know this? We've got 5 minutes left of Dr. Shahana's time.
So for someone like me who's just starting to think about balancing career goals with future planning, family plan, and what insight or advice would you share about navigating those early decisions that everyone has to make in their early 20s?
Yeah, no, excellent. It sounds like you've ticked off one of the hardest things, which is to know what career path brings you passion, or that you feel like this is like a lock and key. This fits for me. Like that's one of the hardest things in your 20s to try to figure out, right? You go from a very undifferentiated school system to going, okay, what path am I eventually going to take? So kudos to you. And I think that can be enough sometimes in your 20s are hard, right? You're trying to figure out your profession. I talk about the two P's, your profession, and if you choose to have a partner, oftentimes that happens in your 20s and sometimes into your 30s as well, too. The word balance is really important, too. I think we love talking about balancing your hormones and finding balance and stuff. I think the truth of the matter is there is no such thing. There is no such thing as balance. There is what your priority is in that moment, right? So if you know that you do want to have children, right? In your early 20s, know that. That's wonderful. As you go into your later 20s as well, after 25, there's no harm in I'm wearing my medical hat right now, but there's no harm in having a conversation with your family doctor or healthcare practitioner and just say, what are some things that I need to know? The reason I ask this is because, for example, if you are on the birth control pill and it seems like you're having monthly cycles, well, the birth control pill is making you have that. But when you stop the birth control pill, if you had irregular cycles before, then we often blame the birth control pill. Well, see, that messed up my hormones. Well, no, it just was a band-aid. It was a mask. You had something where your cycles are not regular. We should start uncovering that, right? That's the type of conversation I have with my young women to go, what were your cycles like before? Do you have conditions like, polycystic ovarian syndrome that could make conception a little bit harder? Not impossible, but we need to have realistic conversations of what childbearing might look like for you. Because I think the hardest thing is that when that clock is ticking to go, oh my goodness, like now what is happening, right? It feels like another aspect of your life that you don't have control over too. And then also realizing that there's a certain period where you're going to really pump and focus 90% on your career. But when you do want to have a child, your career, that balance completely shifts. It's there in the background, but you're 90% into your family. And then slowly, 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 you start to see that seesaw start to even out again. But for example, there's time periods in my life where I do a lot of speaking and I am 80% speaking and 20% family. And other times where I'm 70% family and 30% work. So the seesaw is constantly doing this. And that's why the notion of balance, I think, is erroneous in some ways too, because you're always even when you're on like those balance boards, you're kind of constantly shifting. And that is the dance that you have to start to get comfortable with. And one of the best pieces of advice I can give is that if you do have a partner, that, for example, I just talked yesterday, like I was away at an evening event. So I didn't do tuck-in, I didn't do dinner, I didn't do bedtime. I was at an evening event. My husband covered me for that, right? Brene Brown is often saying, she's like, she will come home and look at her husband and she's like, I'm 20%, which means that she's just got 20% in the tank. And he's like, I'll cover you. I'm 80%. He's like, as long as they together match 100%, then they're okay. Are they ever 50-50 exactly? No, not at all. He works, she works. So that's the beauty of a good partnership. And I think that's where balance, that's where you equal 100. If you do have a supportive partner that can meet you the other part that you're not there. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I think, again, going back to that power of connection and having that support network again, there's so many key themes that have come out of here as well. And that balance, accepting that things are going to change and adding that bit of flexibility as well. I'm very conscious you've got a little one to get to school. I'm going to close this podcast. My last question would just be around, I know you talk a lot about having the foundations in things. What will be the foundations in terms of thriving and managing postpartum?
Yeah. The story goes for me is that I literally found myself on the kitchen floor crying one day, and on the back of the napkin, I drew a little pyramid going, how did I get here? And part of that foundation for me, I'd lost my social connection. I was so, medicine had robbed me of so many things, but part of that was just being very into the cohort that I was within medicine, and we were all doing our own thing. And then just my husband, my partner as well. So I'd lost a lot of connection, which we've talked about the importance. But I also had completely ignored this, the idea that you need to train your brain, right? Your brain often lies to you, right? It'll say to isolate yourself when you actually need social connection. It will say, oh, I don't feel like, do you ever feel like today I'm going to go for a 10-kilometer run? Like, maybe you do, I don't know, but a lot of people just don't feel that way, or they don't feel like today I'm actually going to cook something really healthy versus going for the fast food, right? It's obviously overriding what your brain tells you, because your brain doesn't necessarily want to do what's best for you. Surprise, surprise. It wants to do what is familiar to you, right? And wants to do what is safe, and safe is often familiar, and familiar is often safe. So I had ignored this whole thing that I now call think better and feel better, which it was the foundation of going, what are my emotions trying to tell me? Because I love suppressing my emotions. Like, I was really good at it. Feel something, stuff it way, way, way down deep. You know how you take those clothing and you try to really stuff it in your suitcase as much as possible? That's what I was so good at. And medical school only enhanced that for me as well. And I always joke that the perinatal time period is the time where those roots of what you've suppressed start to go, hello, I'm here again. You thought you'd gotten rid of me, but I'm here. So I'm trying to reconcile that, right? When you become a parent, you start to also reconcile what was happening in your childhood, how you were parented. All of that comes out. If you do have a partner, you also see how they were raised. And that's often where conflict comes, because it's the things that you have just seen. Nobody teaches you how to be a parent. It's what you've observed as well, too. So to be honest, the biggest advice that I could give you is that you would never, ever think that, you know what, before during the pregnancy, hire a personal trainer. You would never say, oh, that's weird. Why would you ever do that? They would say, oh, good for you. Go for that. Why aren't you investing in maybe seeing someone that you could talk to, a psychologist, a counselor? Just like you train your body, could you get a support system that you feel comfortable with and have that connection built earlier on, perinatally, so that when things do get hard, which they will get hard, you already have someone, a healthcare professional that you trust, a counselor, a psychologist, something like that. Train your body and train your brain.
What a fabulous way to close, and what a really powerful message there. Train your brain just like you would train your body, and do it in the early stages. Be proactive. So you've given us an insight into all sorts. I'm so excited. I could talk to you forever and ever, but I know you've got things to do. So please tell our listeners where they can find out more about you, how they can get hold of your book, Feel Better. Yeah, we'd love to know.
Oh, of course, of course. So come check me out on my website, drshahana.com. Please pick up a copy of the book. It's on Amazon, available everywhere. I was just looking at the Amazon statistics, and Canada and North America, US, there's sales, but there was like zero in the UK. So if you want to be the first person in the UK to actually pick up the book, that would be amazing. But I really, if it helps, then let me know. Like, that's, as a new author, I really value that. This is the lifeline that I used, I continue to use to help me as well. This book was born out of me search, and that research is what I'm hoping to help other people with as well. So find the book on Amazon. Come check me out on my website as well. I'm on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, all the things as well. Post things that are important to me and hopefully resonate with you as well.
Our competitive edge has got in there. I'm going to be the first in the UK.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely. It just leaves me to say a huge, huge thank you. And thank you to Vaasvi as well for facilitating this conversation. It's been really, really amazing. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Such important. I wish I'd listened to this conversation, before I'd had my kids. And if this conversation even just helps one person, it is so incredibly worth it. So thank you for bringing this important content into our homes and into our workplaces.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This content has helped me a lot and will be helping me in future as well. And I think that it might be helping the ones who are looking around for such content as well.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So before you stop listening, I want you to pause. What did you take away from the podcast today? What small steps will you start? And what did you hear that you know could help someone else to make small steps to link their health, well-being, productivity and performance? Please do share this episode and please subscribe to the podcast. And remember that Leap Health are here to provide workplace health, well-being and performance workshops, one-to-one coaching and bespoke corporate solutions to help the world make small steps to leap health, well-being, productivity and performance. Please do get in touch. It's Anna at leaphealth.co.uk. Have a great day.